Today is October 30th, 2024. I am Derek Fildebrandt, publisher of the Western Standard, and you're watching The Pipeline. I'm joined by my usual good friends, Western Standard opinion editor Nigel Hannaford.
Lots of opinions here.
And Western Standard senior Alberta columnist Cory Morgan.
Always a pleasure.
All right. It's one of those days where we had no trouble figuring out what we're going to be talking about. Alberta Premier Danielle Smith faces a leadership review at a UCP convention in Red Deer this Saturday. Members of that party will give their thumbs up or down on if they want her to continue as the leader of that party and Premier of Alberta. We're going to be talking about it. Perhaps a slightly bigger deal. This coming Tuesday, Americans will vote in the general election for dog catchers, local sheriffs, and of course, the next president of the United States. We're going to break it down about what we, at least what we expect. And while we do have the results from Saskatchewan, they came a little quicker than they did in British Columbia. The Conservative Saskatchewan Party has defeated the NDP challengers, winning a fifth consecutive term. Very rare in Canadian politics. Possibly the first in Saskatchewan politics. We'd have to maybe Chris Oldcorn is going to come on in a bit. He can fact check us if that is the longest running continuous government in Saskatchewan history. Maybe it will be. Okay, well, gentlemen, let's start close to home here. This Saturday, we're all heading up to Red Deer, covering the Alberta United Conservative Party's convention. They're going to be revising the party's bylaws and constitution. They'll be voting on policies and whatnot, but the really big item on the agenda is the review of Alberta Premier Danielle Smith's leadership. There's been a lot of talk about it. Some organizations and individuals trying to take her down a peg. We'll start with you, Cory. What do you think we can expect with Danielle Smith's leadership review this weekend?
Well, again, similar to my prediction before, I believe she'll come in at over 85% support. I think the organization trying to give her a negative review has been overblown. It's quite different this time than, say, if we're comparing to when Premier Kenney was in power. There were a lot more upset people. And for example, Take Back Alberta was organizing. They had large meetings across the province. They were pulling people together. None of that's been happening. We've got an AGM with almost 6,000 people coming out. It's going to be amazing. Mm-hmm. But to influence that many people, you would have to have a machine that's been operating for months, and we would have seen it. And all I'm seeing is very vocal individuals and small groups who are upset for reasons, I guess, that are debatable, good or bad. But to the point where it would put her at any sort of risk, I just don't believe she's at any.
Nigel, the conventional wisdom, in elections at least, is that high turnout normally bodes poorly for incumbents. This is different. This is an internal party leadership review. But, I mean, it certainly was not a good sign for Jason Kenney when there were thousands of people signing up for his leadership review vote. They saw the numbers coming in, and then they knew they were in trouble, and they changed the rules a few times to try and get a better result. But generally, you know, high turnout like this for a convention is a bit unusual. There's already 5,500 people registered. Probably another 1,000 will register last minute coming in. We're talking 6,000 people plus, which would make it the largest political convention in the history of Canada for any political party, federally or provincially. Ontario parties, much bigger province, have never come close to this. National, conservative, liberal conventions never come close to this. What do you think is behind the huge turnout expected for this convention?
Actually, I think it is a measure of support for the Premier. You mentioned the earlier conventions where Mr. Kenney was dressed down. The resentments there stemmed principally, I think, from COVID and his government's response to it. And that was an issue about which people felt viscerally. And it was worth paying the money to go and just put your vote in the no column. There is not an issue at the moment that I can think of which would make a negatively inclined person fork out $400 plus go to Red Deer, probably incur a hotel room in order to do what? Tell Danielle Smith that you don't like the job she's doing. They may not like it, but I don't think they're prepared to spend $400 on it. However, people who do want to support the Premier and who have been alerted partly by some of the columns that Cory has written, and also some of the news articles in the Western Standard that have been pointing out that there are people who are actively working to undermine her, make supporters defensive. They say, right, I'm going to go to Red Deer and I'm going to vote for her. So my expectation, rather similar to Cory's, is that it's going to be very satisfying for her at the end of the day. She's going to get a good score. And the people who don't like her badly enough to spend $400 to say so.
All right, well, let's talk about the result she needs. I know we've discussed this before, and you said 50% plus one. I mean, that's generally when a leader is asked what percentage do you need to stay on as leader, that's the answer they give, because that is within the constitution of political parties everywhere. That's the bar that's set. But no one can maintain the confidence of a party at 50% plus one. Jason Kenney knew that. And he stepped down. If you're at 50% plus one, the next day the caucus knifes you, and it's over. So we know it's more than 50% plus one effectively, but we know it's less than 100%. Rachel Notley used to get close to 100% within her party. Conservatives, particularly in Alberta, are not such a sanguine bunch. There's always going to be a chunk to vote against the leader. I'm not sure there's a magic number, but I think, perhaps there is a poison number. I think, is it 77 or is it 78? There's a magic number that both Stelmach and Redford got.
I think it was 77 or something, but
77 point something.
I think the real danger zone at this point, though, would be maybe 70. It's a little lower, but then we're talking about a much larger group of people going on. That's a large plurality of 6,000 people. But if she came in at 70%, there's going to have to be some questions asked. Then this is a trend that you don't like, as a new leader, typically there's a grace period with members and so on, and she's obviously not enjoying it. So I think that level is where you're really going to have to start sweating. I mean, anything above 70, you're still sitting pretty good with a large crowd like that.
Nigel, perhaps not the resignation number, but what do you think is the trouble number? That if Smith hits this number and below, she's going to be dealing with sniping within caucus and, perhaps organization against her in the future. Not gone that day, but what number is she safe?
Well, certainly I would say she'd be safe at 70%. You've also got to look at where that 70%.
Remember, Stelmach and Redford both got 77, and both of them were gone within 1 year from there.
There could have been other reasons.
True.
If given the campaign that we believe has been waged against her by people who may not necessarily be bona fide members of the party, I mean, buying a membership for the express purpose of embarrassing the Premier, I would have to say, well, how many of the 30% that we're assuming voted against her fall into that category, and make your estimation from there. Among bona fide, long-term people who buy their subscriptions for 5 years at a time and keep on going to the conventions, my sense is that her popularity is very high, and why wouldn't it be? Look at the things that she said she would do that she then went on to do. If that's what you voted for, that is what you got. Why wouldn't you support her? So I would not be troubled at 70%.
Well, both sides will sign up people the last minute trying to get it. I remember, with the battle over Kenney's leadership, both sides were going out and selling. And both, particularly Kenney, dipped into some ethnic groups, Take Back Alberta, signing up people who tended to vote Conservative, but many of which hadn't been members of the party. Both will try to sign up people, and maybe it's a wash at the end of the day. Hard to say. All right, but Smith has been making some pretty big policy announcements in the lead up to this. These are things I think she always intended to do, but they seem to be coincidentally timed to be right before the leadership vote here, to kind of gin up the base. But I think the media is really missing the area of the party that's not perhaps loved her the most, and that's kind of the left wing of the party, red Tories, for lack of a better term. She was not, to put it lightly, she was not very strong with them when she won the leadership of the party. They've never been totally enthralled with her leadership. She came very much, obviously, from the Wild Rose wing of the UCP. But red Tories tend to be much less revolutionary and rebellious than the right wing of the party. They tend to go along with it. The leader is the leader, and they'll back the leader unless there's something so particularly egregious they can't abide it any longer. Cory, we don't hear much from them, but we tend not to. When the red Tories are angry, they tend to operate more in the back rooms and organize quietly. Do you think she has anything to worry from kind of the left wing of the UCP in this vote?
I don't think so. Again, the reddest of the red Tories probably already left. They're not going to show up. They're perhaps mulling over Ninchi if he's made the NDP pragmatic enough for them or not. The moderate ones, as you said, they tend to put their heads down. They'll grumble behind closed doors, but they don't have that conservative habit of saying, we've got to rip out our leaders. I look at past comparisons, for example, with Ralph Klein and Nancy Bethkowski. I'm going, dating myself. This was early 90s. But that was a hard-fought race and a close race, and it was a red versus blue race. But when that ended, Klein's initial party review type supports, again, you're getting into the 90%. Like, this was very, very high. Those red Tories just grinned and bared it, even though Ralph Klein took things on a, at least very fiscally conservative front. So, again, I don't think there's going to be a big threat from them. There's going to be some people upset. I mean, the AGM is an opportunity for people to air their concerns, and there's concerns legitimately to be had with the caucus and Smith's direction, but there's other ways to air those concerns rather than vote to tear them out of the leadership. I think some of the people go that route, rather than, again, I mean, you got to think, what's the day after then? If you knocked her down to 49%, well, what now? I don't think that'd be the outcome anybody wants.
Nigel, you were the chief speechwriter to Stephen Harper for a long time, long period of his prime ministership. If you were writing Danielle Smith's speech that she's going to give before people go out and vote, the way these things work, the leader gets the last word. The leader gets to give a speech, and they say, "Now go vote." Yeah. They don't. The leader doesn't speak, and then someone who doesn't like them gets up to speak. The leader speaks, then you vote. If you were writing Smith's speech, what are the big things you'd want her to be saying right before these people vote?
Well, I'd be wanting to, first of all, to remind everybody that I said I would do these things, and I have done them. And these are some other things that I have promised to do. And if that's the vision for Alberta that you want, and it's certainly the vision that I am offering, that I am prepared to stake my name on, to make this a better, brighter, more prosperous Alberta, then you need to stay with proven leadership. And I am at your service. I mean, the things that she promised to do, she has always constrained by what is possible. So you want an Alberta police force, as some of the dissidents within the party are very, very strong on that. All right. That's a little easier to promise than to perform. But what she has done is she has expanded the sheriff's service and moved sheriffs into police roles. You want an Alberta pension plan? Well, when that actually got floated out, not as many people were in favor of that as she probably thought would be. Well, then you say you want to represent your voters. Maybe it's time to throttle back on that and build the case. You could go through the list of the things that she's put out there. The latest one that she introduced this week, the Alberta Bill of Rights amendments. I mean, there are some serious concerns on that, but at least she thinks about the Alberta Bill of Rights and what it means to how you keep the government out of your backyard. So maybe there's some fine tuning to be done on that, but nevertheless, it shows where her heart is, and I think that where her heart is where the heart of the voting members of the party is. I don't see a problem coming here, so my speech would very much be one of hope and aspiration.
Cory, it's not unusual to tap, and increasingly in Alberta politics, it's not unusual to tap into different ethnic or religious groups to kind of support you en masse in something. It happens in leadership races where you're selecting the leader. It happened when Kenny's leadership was up for review. Happens in general elections where you kind of tap into ethnic groups because they can, more so than, I'm going to get in trouble with this, old stock Canadians.
People like us, you mean?
Yeah. There's a degree of homogeneity that
they're more inclined to vote in a block due to a community leader telling them to do so as opposed to
exactly. and there's been some reports in the we've reported on the Standard in our newsroom that there's some Islamic schools that are bringing people up to support Smith in the leadership review vote because they're back, because she's been pretty strident in her defense of independent schooling, choice in education, and Christians benefit from that, but also other religions, including Muslims, benefit from that. But I mean, there's been some pretty serious tension. I'm overly generalizing here, but between conservatives who tend disproportionately to support Israel and Islamic groups, which disproportionately tend to not. And so there's tension between Muslims and non-Muslims over the Israel-Palestine conflict right now. And there's a lot of Muslims coming in who are going to be supporting Smith. They're expected to support Smith in the leadership review vote. That's certainly rubbed some people the wrong way. What do you expect to come from here? Do you think you're going to see, is that going to raise some eyebrows at the convention when we see large numbers of a particular group coming in to support someone? Or do you think it's going to be like, oh, great, tent's getting bigger, welcoming more people in? How do you think people are going to react to that on the floor?
Well, I mean, at least as far as provincial politics goes, the Israel conflict and such isn't spilling over so much as they don't expect the premier to step into that mess as much as we're looking federally.
I mean, members of the Ontario legislature get removed for supporting Hamas.
And then we haven't had that extent happen here to turn it into such a test.
There's been Alberta NDP MLAs who have been quite vocal in their support of Hamas.
That's because the NDP is overloaded with anti-Semites, and that happens in every province. But it hasn't blown up here as it has in other areas. So I'm just saying it's not as much in that particular aspect of a factor in this AGM. Mm-hmm. It's something that'll get us in trouble in some ways, or it's not so much, but it's just pointing out a fact. Large conservative conventions have not had a big, diverse group in them. It's been, older white people for the majority, and it's always been a challenge to try and bring in people from other communities. And whether this is viewed as changing that, the thing is, to move the vote on the leadership, if that's what the intent of bringing large amounts of Muslim individuals in, you will have to bring in a couple thousand. That's what we're talking about when we're talking about a 6,000 person AGM. That is going to stand out in the room very dramatically. And I think even if the intent might be something somebody kind of agrees with, they would see that as pretty ill-advised tactic when we're supposed to be discussing the party as a whole and a lot of other things, and it might not be received well by others. I know others would label it as racist, but no, you're bringing in non-traditional supporters just to win one particular vote. People would find that a bit offensive. I just would be surprised again if we see a couple of thousand people bust in for an event at that expense to swing a vote. But we'll see. I mean, if there's that large a segment going on in there, it's going to raise some eyebrows, and people are going to have some discussions then about how the party is being managed.
All right. We're going to turn now to the U.S. presidential and many other elections taking place Tuesday. America likes its elections. They've generally got them every 2 years, but actually, because they're on a schedule, I think they actually end up having less elections than we do. They just have bigger, longer ballots where you can do state and federal at the same time as things turn over. But obviously, the big one everyone's always watching is the presidential race. The polls are in a dead heat. Most of the polls I've seen have got Kamala Harris at 49, Trump at 48, well within the margin of error. Generally, the way the Electoral College works, if the two are tied in the popular vote, the Republican wins. But they're not, they're within the margin of error. It's likely to be a close race, and it's obviously been nasty. Everyone always says, well, this is the most nasty election ever. Everyone says that always in the election that they're in. I'm inclined always to say, stop clutching your pearls. Everyone always thinks things were more civil in the past. And sometimes they were. I mean, Reagan-Mondale was pretty civil and nice, I think, in comparison. But in general, these things have always been nasty. But good God, this one is particularly nasty. Kamala Harris saying Trump is a fascist, a Nazi. The most ridiculous thing I've seen to date, I think, in this campaign was Trump has a rally at Madison Square Gardens, and they say, well, the American Nazi Party also had a rally at Madison Square Gardens in the 1938 or 39 or something. Yeah, you know who else also had rallies at Madison Square Gardens? JFK. Kamala Harris just had her big kind of end of campaign rally at the National Mall in DC. You know who also had a rally there in the 30s or the 20s? The Ku Klux Klan. I mean, it's so like because someone held something, because you have a race, because you have because you have a race of cars at Nuremberg doesn't mean the cars are Nazis, even though it's on literally the same grounds. It's gone pretty nuts. Maybe we'll just start off with predictions. We'll start with you, Nigel. What do you think we're going to see Tuesday?
Well, I think you're going to see a Trump victory. I think you'll also see it challenged, but I think that Trump will win the Electoral College. The polls which you spoke of are a measure of popular support, and he may win those too, or he may get a little more than Kamala Harris in that as well. But the important thing is to win the Electoral College, and there I think he has. I think he has it in the bag. Unfortunately for Ms. Harris, she does not present well. She may be a wonderful person, but I'm saying that not because I believe it, but because that would seem like you must acknowledge that people don't always give all of their best when they're in public. She may be a wonderful person, great qualities, but she has not done well in her public presentations. She's been, the word salad phrase has been tossed around frequently in her to describe her reactions to really quite simple questions. And you just can't picture this person as the commander-in-chief. I think people just feel sufficiently uneasy about her that even though they may not like Trump, they will say, well, it wasn't so bad in the 4 years that he was president. Maybe that's the safer choice.
Cory, there's one of the big risks with name calling on politics and or hyperbole about your opponents is the story of the boy who cried wolf. And Hillary Clinton said that Trump was a fascist. I'm not sure if you use those words.
She didn't use it directly. I mean, that's a level that has escalated.
Yeah.
They'll talk around it before.
It was highly implied.
Now they aren't even masking it. Yeah.
Oh, I said, misogynist, sexist, racist, ists, did all of that. And then we had 4 years of him. Certainly turbulent, colorful. These are... it was an unconventional 4 years in some negative ways, in some positive ways too. No wars. Last time that happened was Herbert Hoover. So it's been a long time since we had a president that didn't get America into wars, strengthened up the border, the economy did pretty well, but there was a lot of turbulence. But I don't recall any death camps. I don't recall Trump invading Poland at any time. None of these things happened, but the rhetoric now is even more extreme. Do you think, how effective is this? The rhetoric coming from Kamala Harris and her surrogates that this man is Hitler. You elect him, it's going to be the Fourth Reich. How effective is that when he's actually had 4 years and none of those things even came close to passing?
I don't think it's effective, and I think it's showing some desperation on the part of that campaign, actually, because they're not fools. They got some smart strategists in there, and I think they're not liking some of the numbers they're seeing or how close it's going to be. I say on my show quite regularly, and it always gets me a bunch of emails from viewers who get upset. I'm not a fan of Trump. I'm not warm on him. But if I were an American voter and I'd watch this, particularly, as you said, with the ludicrousness of a headline on TV showing this was where a Nazi rally was held, almost 100 years ago, thus, the effort they went to put the word Nazi and Trump into the same sentence is, people see through that. And that might take me from where I was thinking I was going to watch something interesting on TV that night. But you know what? I'm going to get up and cast a ballot for this man because I'm just sick of this. That's above and beyond ridiculous. As you know, yes, he's been in for 4 years and he didn't necessarily impress everybody during those 4 years, but no, he didn't do anything crazed despite what everybody accused of him. He didn't invade any countries. Actually, ironically, of all things, as unstable as he might seem, he's one of the least hawkish type of politicians we've seen in the United States in a long time. He seems quite averse to putting American soldiers in danger in any circumstances, whereas Obama certainly didn't hesitate to.
Okay.
Actually, just to the point about the fascists, I wonder if people actually know today what a fascist is.
It's never been well defined, both when fascism was a thing, today, and every time in between. It's hard to say.
There was a U.S. senator who put out a tweet, and unfortunately, I didn't bring it in with me, but it was to, if you actually know what a fascist is, and then you watch the Democrat campaign, they want to jail Trump, want to get rid of the Electoral College. They want to, pack the Supreme Court. He went on about 3 months. That was where the fascism was in the Democratic platform. Now, you don't want a politics 101 course on the definition of fascism.
Well,
just funny how these things get tossed around as a slur. Nothing more.
I think where a lot of people go wrong in calling everything fascist is just a misassociation with authoritarian. Justin Trudeau, I believe, is an authoritarian. I don't believe he's a fascist. A fascist, I can't even say that is a very specific thing, but it is not this thing. It's a particular brand of authoritarianism. And authoritarianism is very broad. It includes communist regimes, fascist regimes, military juntas, and certain democratic regimes that can be perfectly democratically elected, but employ the Indian government is arguably fairly authoritarian. They still have elections. Fascism isn't merely the absence of elections. It's a lot of different.
Hitler won the 1933 election fair and square. So there you go.
And it's an abuse of the term, and it's ruining people on proper history, anyways. I mean, if they want to look and see what the Mussolini administration was about, and some of those, and it's being lost because it's being tossed at anybody and everybody. We're seeing it in Canadian politics being thrown around too, and
it's getting to the point where tiresome. I won't vote for someone unless the left calls them a racist and a fascist and a sexist. If you don't get called those things, it means you're probably way too vanilla for me to vote for.
Yeah, it's sad.
I don't want the guys I vote for. I don't want to say I am a fascist, racist, etc. But if they're not getting called that, that means they're not doing a very good job.
Communications, 101.
So this is going to come down to a couple. It's Electoral College. Everybody likes to look at the big line numbers. 49 Harris, 48 Trump. That actually doesn't matter. I mean, theoretically, you could. There's actually been I think. What did Abraham Lincoln win with? It was very little, but at that time it was a very fractured party system. You had the Republicans, you had the Whigs, you had Northern Democrats and Southern Democrats. It was a very fractured system. But you can become president with the Electoral College. Like in Canada, Justin Trudeau is prime minister with low 30s. You don't need anywhere close to a majority. It's going to come down to a few things. I'm putting Ohio pretty. I think if the Republicans don't win Ohio on Tuesday, that means they're not winning. But I think they're going to win Ohio. But if they also take Pennsylvania, there's a few paths for Trump to win on Tuesday. There's not as many paths to victory for Kamala Harris. Nigel, how do you think the math is looking through the different routes to victory for each party?
Well, that is actually the basis of my earlier prediction that Trump was going to take it. You mentioned Pennsylvania. The media has played down the attack on Trump that clipped his ear and could easily have clipped his skull. They haven't forgotten about it in Pennsylvania, nor his response to it and how he went back and greeted the people who had survived, comforted the people who had lost individuals in that attack. I would be quite surprised if Trump does not take Pennsylvania. Kamala, the issue there is fracking. Kamala Harris has said she won't end fracking. But on the other hand, she said that she would end fracking for about the last 10 years. And it's only in the last 10 weeks that she's had a change of heart on that. People aren't stupid. And I suspect that Pennsylvania will go. Ohio, yes. Probably Vance is helping there as well as a true son of the state. Virginia, there was an important case this morning.
Yeah, but that's still probably staying blue.
Well,
I mean, if the Democrats lose Virginia, it's over.
We'll see what difference it makes when they take out the people who are not actually citizens and shouldn't be voting. So
it's true.
I can see some.
But Virginia's become a blue state largely because as Washington, it's civil servants working in the federal government. People working for the government tend overwhelmingly to vote for leftist parties that are more favorable to bigger governments and more employees, more benefits, etc. So I think it would take a lot to flip Virginia. If tomorrow night somehow, if Virginia goes red, there is almost no path for Kamala Harris to win without Virginia, because that's been in the solid blue column since. Did George W. Bush win Virginia? That may have been the last time.
I don't remember. No.
Yeah, it's been a long time since the Republicans won Virginia. Okay, well, we're going to move on to the Saskatchewan election in a second, but I actually want to talk about the assassination really quick, Corey. That was a seminal moment in American history. It's going to be it's already probably one of the most iconic photographs in world history ever. Do we just have the attention spans of goldfish? Like we're not even really thinking about it anymore. That was such a huge issue, but I think was Joe Biden still technically the Democratic nominee when that happened?
He was.
Yeah, just things have just changed so much since. Why is this not, you think, playing a bigger role?
There's just been so much. I think it's just overload. And it was quite a moment. I mean, it was a moment, as I said, as a person who didn't think highly of Trump. Now, I certainly wouldn't want him shot. But that moment, actually, when this guy, he gets shot, he gets up, and I probably would have been curled fetal and screaming, and he's up and defiant and yelling. And I had to admit, that's a strong-looking, defiant man. That made me think, yeah, if I were a voter, I'd be more inclined leaning that way. How long that effect held or resonated with people, it remains to be seen. I worked it's so hard. The Electoral College, I spent a lot of time in Pennsylvania, and it's a complicated state. Mm-hmm. The west side, Butler is just north of Pittsburgh. That's good blue-collar country. That's, old Rust Belt now, steel and manufacturing, and getting all the way in. But then you get towards Philadelphia and that. Now you've got a high immigration population, a lot more, again, government jobs, civil service, that sort of thing. And the recent thing with, at least they're really trying to bring it up, is enraging Puerto Ricans. Well, Philadelphia has hundreds of thousands of people of Puerto Rican descent. Will that impact them or not? I don't know. But I don't think any undecideds have swung in the last month. I really don't. That polarized country is already the people who made their camp minds up. There's always some who poll as undecided. Those are the people who don't vote. And the amount of movement between those two camps has been so limited. Yeah. It always astounds me, a country that big and diverse, and how close their elections always are. It's amazing. So it's tough to make a call. I mean, with Nigel, I think it's going to be a slim, I think, victory for Trump, based more on the Electoral College than perhaps on popular vote. But it's going to be close. I certainly wouldn't, I'm not a betting man. I wouldn't want to put more than $10 on it.
Okay. All right. Well, we're going to turn towards Saskatchewan now, who just on our Tuesday, I think it was Tuesday, had, was it Tuesday, Chris?
It was decided almost early Tuesday morning, but no, it was Monday night. But I didn't get called till about 11:40 for the Sask Party.
Okay, well, we've got, I kind of got ahead of myself here. We've got the Western Standard's Saskatchewan reporter and managing editor of the Saskatchewan Standard, Chris Oldcorn here, who has been doing God's work on the ground, reporting on the Saskatchewan election. Chris, I really hated our segments with you for the first 2 weeks of the campaign. Not because you're boring, but because what we were talking about was so boring. The Saskatchewan election was unbearably boring, as is often the case when you've got a government seeking its fifth term. But, the NDP became, actually, let's talk about the polls. The polls that were out there were showing the NDP was going to win. There was modeling based on it, showing the NDP winning a majority government. They won some more seats on Monday night, but they came nowhere close to winning. Why do you think the pollsters got it so completely wrong in Saskatchewan?
Because the polls that had the NDP up are not as reputable as other pollsters who had the Sask Party leading. The other thing as well is that those polls overly represented the two urban cities, Regina and Saskatoon, which is where the NDP won most of their votes. As a matter of fact, those polls that showed the NDP was going to win had them in the popular vote, even as high as 50%. Right now, we're counting the mail-in ballots, but they are sitting at about 39%, which is much more accurate to other pollsters, such as Angus Reid, who predicted the election with a much greater degree of accuracy.
All right, so they didn't all get it wrong then, but the ones we were seeing, I know CTV was reporting on polls regularly. I kept on sending you these, saying, "What do you think, Chris?" And you're like, they're BS. These are no good." And I don't know. I'm not from Saskatchewan. We're next door here in Alberta, but I kept on seeing these, thinking, it's looking tight. What do you think was? What were the defining moments of the campaign that shaped how things worked out?
I think the Balgoni changing room story was actually where the campaign turned, and I think that also galvanized Sask Party supporters when they saw what was going on there with biological boys in a grade 7 female changing room. And then the very next day, after we broke the story, Scott Moe is coming out saying that there's going to be a ministerial order protecting biological boys in boys' change rooms and biological girls in girls' change rooms. That then became the story basically for the rest of the election. And up until that point, the Sask Party was talking about, reducing your income tax and extending the small business, tax break by 1% for an extra year, like stuff that income tax is not sexy. People very rarely pay attention to it, and most don't even understand how it would even change their financial picture, other than you tell them it's going to save them $800 a year, but they have to make exactly $72,000 to save the $800. So things like that, the average person on the street doesn't really understand, and they hear the word income tax and I think, oh my goodness, is it April? And then they just tune out. And fortunately for the Sask Party, there was a couple issues that came up halfway through the campaign that they were able to galvanize their supporters around.
The NDP ran an interesting campaign, though. They had their traditional lefty, socialist, democratic promises: more spending on X, more spending on Y. But they had a few things that surprised me, and you get these from Prairie New Democrats sometimes, like on the gas tax, where they tried to outflank the Saskatchewan Party on the right.
Yeah, they've been actually calling for a gas tax cut for probably around 2 years at this point to help with affordability. But that's the money that goes towards our roads here in Saskatchewan. And unfortunately, we only have 1.2 million people that live here, and we have a lot of space to build roads. So it's even a hard sell for the NDP to talk about cutting the gas tax, because people already know here how crappy the roads can be in certain areas. And if you start cutting the gas tax, you start cutting road repairs. And that's a hard sell here, because there are roads that are really bad in this province, and the gas tax fixes them.
Nigel, I think you had it.
Yeah, well, I was thinking about that gas tax promise. These promises have to be believable. And when the NDP comes along and has what appears to be a very, central casting playbook of socialist ideas, and then they turn around with a very conservative thing like say, and we will cut your gas taxes, it doesn't seem to fit somehow. And that lowers the credibility, not merely of that one promise, but all of the entire campaign strategy. The point that I took out of that result, though, was that unlike Prince Edward Island, New Brunswick, where the premier came out quite strongly on the matter of parental authority and being required for name changes when kids wanted to transition and so forth. And he lost his election, and people said, "Oh, anybody who took a stand on that is going to pay for it." But in Saskatchewan, they didn't pay for it. What do you think the difference was?
Saskatchewan is the most conservative province in Canada. Sorry to disappoint you out in Alberta there, but as far as you look at the federal votes, this entire province goes blue, including Regina and Saskatoon. I think things like the gas tax that they were promising was actually an attempt to try and get some rural voters. It just didn't work. They were completely shut out. Even places where they were expected to pick up a couple rural seats, they lost them all to the Sask Party. And some of them they lost very convincingly. Tim McLeod in Moose Jaw, it was favored that the NDP were going to win that. He won a seat by almost 2,500 votes. So the pollsters were really wrong on the NDP in this province. They were
in Balgony?
That's the change room.
Yeah, no.
Yeah.
I think it was that there was
Where it is.
That was an NDP seat. Is it still an NDP seat?
No, it was not an NDP seat. It was White City, Fort Capel. It was a redesigned seat, though.
Oh.
So what happened was Christine Tell, she lost the rural part of her riding and then just had her riding inside of Regina because of the way that the redistribution happened. And as a matter of fact, there was actually a couple ministers that basically lost their seats up in Saskatoon simply because they had the rural part of their riding cut out. So they lost a good chunk of their conservative support. Actually, this election was not as good for the NDP if we would have been using the old election map, because there was multiple seats in both the outskirts of Saskatoon and Regina that the NDP got slaughtered in the last election by thousands of votes. But when you redesign where the boundaries are, they ended up actually picking up seats. So this is not as impressive as a win for the NDP as they think it is, if you actually consider the way that some of the boundaries were redrawn, including White City, Fort Capel, which the Sask Party held on to it, but unfortunately they lost Minister Christine Tell.
All right, Chris. Well, thank you very much. Thank you for all the work you did during Saskatchewan's election there. You get to take a little break, and then we're going to get you right back to the good work you do.
Thank you very much. Have a good afternoon.
All right, gentlemen. Before we leave, it's time for our parting shots. We'll start with you, Nigel.
The delightful picture that Lorraine Harper sent in showing her cat trying to stare down a cougar through the window. That was one of the best pictures I've seen this month.
All right. Yeah, I think that's, well, we won't name where it is so people don't, but it's in, let's say, the greater Calgary area. Corey, your parting shot.
Well, I noticed that Canada Post, which lost over $700 million last year, their union has now put out a strike mandate. Their demand, Canada Post even offered them 11.5% for these flyer delivery boys to carry on in their obsolete service, which is poorly conducted to begin with. This should be the time when Canadians say, you know what, maybe it's time we cut that service down to the tiny shell of what it should be for some remote areas, because they've pushed it too far. This is absurd. I mean, for you guys to be demanding more money when you've got an organization that's bleeding like that is well, it's pure union, guys. So yeah, here's my parting shot, guys. You're shooting yourselves in the feet this time, I think, because Canadians are tired of it.
All right. And for me, I just want to remind everyone that Alberta NDP leader Naheed Nenshi still doesn't have a seat. There's a by-election taking place. It hasn't been called yet. But the Alberta NDP leader, Nenshi became leader in roughly May or so, with a huge mandate from New Democrats to lead that party. And he says he wants a Calgary seat. The NDP have lots of Calgary seats, yet not one has seemed to open up for Nenshi. So I don't know. He's either got to get someone to open up a seat for him here, or he should go around in Lethbridge. Pick one. All right, gentlemen, and thank all of you for joining us today. Remember, the Western Standard refuses to take Justin Trudeau's federal media bailout money. We rely on memberships from people like you to do the work we do. We are one of an extremely, extremely small number of genuinely independent media left in Canada that do not take the federal government's media bailout subsidies. If you want to see us continue doing our work, please go to westernstandard.news right now. Click on subscribe. It's only $10 a month or $100 a year, and you'll get unlimited access to all Western Standard content straight through that pesky paywall, and you'll be doing your part to put your money where your mouth is and help support the work that we're doing. Thank you very much for joining us today, and God bless.